works with changes and change control. We'll look at this UK Portal business service as an example of that. We're not going to focus on the events and alarms or even the impact screen to the right. We're going to be looking at the history bar and how that dovetails with the change environment. So first of all, the history bar shows the status of the service, and you can see this one's been in a red status for quite some time in this demo database. However, if we scroll back far enough, we can see that there were 13 changes made to this business service back on June 6th. In fact, if we were scrolling in on an hourly basis, we could see these change bubbles individually and hover over each one and look at the details. Of course, we can drill in on the right and see details about any particular change as selected. But the really interesting thing here is that we can bracket these changes by time, as you see I'm doing here, and this lets us ask the question, what happened last Tuesday night? The example here, of course, is that Tuesday night you logged into a server. Before going home, everything checked out fine, you made no changes, but Wednesday morning someone was paged to go repair the server because it was down or in a problem condition, and there weren't any hardware failures. So the question always is what changed, who changed something, what was done to the machine. With this dialog right here, we can answer the question, what happened Tuesday night? So let's click compare. Let's look at the topology between roughly 10:30 and 1 o'clock on the 6th. We can immediately see that there's a whole branch of this topology added in green. So that's a new branch of the topology. It was newly discovered during this 2 or 3 hour time period. Each component is also flagged with the added moniker so that you can visually and very easily see which devices or which components were new members of this business service. We can also, of course, click into any one of those and look at the usual attributes on the right to see exactly what happened. Now, this is a topological change. There are also other changes that are reflected in the form of configuration changes. In fact, if we look at the change report, we can see for this other business service, e-banking, that there were many kinds of changes made to the service over the course of quite some time. For example, here you can see the installation path changed for the SQL Server software and the version change. Now this may be really important because perhaps this version is one that's not allowed in the enterprise or one that requires a service pack as a follow-up, and then will maybe even require a reboot of that particular server. Maybe the installation path isn't in compliance with the way things are typically installed in the enterprise, and it needs to be changed. So these are important things to be able to track, and those would also show up on the right if the configuration changes occurred with the highlighted colors on the appropriate attribute that had changed. So here we are looking at a topological change. I wonder what this looked like before this period of discovery after 10:30 that morning. I can re-click the history bar and simply move my search bars to some period before those changes occurred. Now when I click compare, I get a third tab up top for the same business service, and I'm now looking at a snapshot of the history of the topology of this business service as it existed prior to that larger discovery. And I can see that previously the business service was quite small, quite even simplistic, you could say, compared to the way it existed after that discovery, and on the initial tab, the way it still exists today. So with this change history, we're able to effectively see snapshots of the topology and the changes back in time. You could really look at a snapshot in last June if you wanted, as long as you have disk space to store the changes in the database. And those aren't very hefty requirements either. So another aspect of the changes, though, is to see, well, what's the impact of a change? So using that example of the SQL Server where maybe the installation directory was incorrect or inappropriate, or it needs a service pack. So we're looking at the SQL Server thinking, yeah, I might need to notify some folks before I reboot this machine after the service pack install. But who works with the SQL Server, what lines of business are dependent on it. We're able to right-click right from any individual component, and Service Watch brings us into another screen which then shows the selected component along with related software components. And over on the left of the screen, we will then see which business services out of our 25 or 30 business services are impacted. And we can see 10 or 12 over here that are all dependent on the SQL Server. So if we're going to bring this thing down, we better notify all these business owners, or perhaps in addition to the server or DBA responsible for this particular machine. Now, the impact analysis goes one step further. We can click on a particular service and ask the question, what else do you require in this particular software environment? We already know about the SQL Server, but we can see that we also require a SharePoint, two SharePoint applications on two different servers, it looks like, and we can click through the various business services and see exactly what they require out of this environment. Because perhaps when I apply a service pack to the SQL Server, perhaps there's an associated service pack or patch that's needed on the SharePoint, and they have to be done in tandem. So it's important to know the impact not only on the business service, but on related components. So we've kind of performed a drill down from the business service to the components, but we can also perform a drill up, and that is, if we select a particular component such as this IIS server, we're able to see that only 2 of these business services actually depend on this IIS machine. So that might be an easy one, sort of the low-hanging fruit type of target. If I needed to perform some sort of add, move, or change on this one, that might be one of the first ones I tackle, since only 2 lines of business will be affected. So this all happens in this physical topology screen. This is where we search for components, and this is where we look at the impact analysis of components to services and services to components. And this is accessible from any component on the business service maps, which we first accessed over on the monitoring area of the tool.